Welcome to TSNN's live webinar series. The title of today's webinar is Don't Let Your Event Brand Itself. To submit a question or comment at any time during the webinar, please click on the Ask a Question button on the bottom of your screen. Simply type your message into the box and click on the Submit button. Our expert moderator and lively panelists will answer questions during the last 10 to 15 minutes of our webinar, so please join in. Alternatively, you can join the conversation and ask questions anytime on Twitter at #TSNNWebinar. Now, Arlene Shows, Marketing Manager for TSNN, would like to say a few words.
Hello from TSNN and welcome everybody. Thanks for tuning in. A big thanks goes out to our devoted sponsors, Signature Boston, MCCA, and OnStream Media. Because of their support, we are able to deliver these educational topics to you free of charge. A round of thanks goes out to Signature Boston and the Massachusetts Convention Center Authority. They own and operate the Boston Convention and Exhibition Center and the Heinz Convention Center. Boston certainly represents unique benefits and advantages of bringing an event there, including state-of-the-art facilities, first-class hotels, unique history, culture, and top-notch services, including free Wi-Fi throughout the BCEC and the Heinz. All TSNN webinars are brought to you by OnStream Media, the leader in multimedia webinar and webcasting services. Their platform has been ranked #1 by top 10 reviews and is being used to power today's event. OnStream is also offering a special promotion for a limited time. If any customer presents their conferencing bill to them, they will attempt to cut it in half, no strings attached. Contact OnStream to learn more by visiting onstreammedia.com. Now allow me to introduce our moderator today, Kevin Miller, President and Chief Strategist at Frost Miller. He founded the company based on the principles of integrated marketing 23 years ago. Since then, he has helped dozens of event organizers understand branding and harness its power to achieve business goals. We can't wait to learn today, Kevin, so let's get started. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Arlene. And thank you all for attending this webinar to discuss a really very hot topic among show organizers, and that is how to create an event brand. Today I'm joined by Elizabeth Johnson, who is Frost Miller's Director of Content Marketing. Liz works out of New York City. We're also joined by Allison Moser, who is the Director of Marketing for the American Gastroenterological Association of Bethesda, Maryland. AGA is one of 4 associations that produce Digestive Disease Week. We also will be joined by Martha Sawchuk, who is Director of Marketing for the American Association for the Study of Liver Diseases in Alexandria, Virginia. AASLD's signature event is the Liver Meeting. So we have panelists here that will talk about branding from both the agency side and from the show organizer side. And we have several other examples to share with you as well. So we hope that you will find this to be very informative. Branding is perhaps the most commonly used but most commonly misunderstood word in business. In the next hour or so, we'll briefly explain what a brand is and what a brand is not, and then relate branding to event marketing. We'll talk about what a branded event is and explain why you should brand an event, and finally provide steps for branding your own event. This will be followed by a case study about the rebranding of the Liver Meeting. And at the end, we'll be able to take your pressing branding questions, so don't forget to submit your questions along the way. In addition to giving a presentation, throughout the presentation, we're going to present some polling questions too, because we'd really like to make this as interactive of a webinar as possible, and sort of to gauge what the industry's position is on branding. So the first question, the first polling question that I want to ask everyone is, do you currently engage in an intentional branding effort specifically for your event? So if you just take a few minutes, hopefully this polling question shows up and you can take a few minutes to answer the question. We'd really be interested to see whether your organization is actively engaged in intentionally branding your event right now. And with that, I'd like now to move on to Elizabeth Johnson.
Thanks, Kevin. Okay, I want to ask everyone to think about an iconic brand. Now, what comes to mind when you think of Nike or Starbucks or Walmart? A brand is not a logo, a tagline, a jingle, or a product itself. A brand is all of those things. It's a person's gut feeling about a product, service, or company. All of these gut feelings you have are the result of meticulous planning by companies. The amount of time and energy companies like Nike and Starbucks and many others put into developing their brands is important for many reasons. On any given day, people are exposed to 4,000 messages on average. That's a lot of clutter for a brand to cut through. And on average, people need to be exposed to a marketing message 8 to 10 times before they remember it. When people make a purchase, they base their decision on the benefits of the product or service. These are decisions based on emotions rather than facts, and brands appeal to emotions by creating trust. Good branding strengthens the impact of all of your marketing messages and paves the way for new customers. A strong brand serves as a litmus test for all your decisions, allowing you to ask, does this presenter support the brand? Or does this digital ad support the brand's promise? And so on. All right, so why brand your event? The simple answer is money. A good brand creates value. A well-branded event adds value and revenue for its organizer. Once your show is properly branded, prospective participants will know that it's right for them, and past attendees will evangelize because the event delivered what it promised. Revenue should increase, vision and mission should be realized, and business goals achieved. And a warning, branding isn't really something you can avoid. People's perceptions of your event still exist and form your brand, whether or not you work to shape those perceptions. Not putting resources into branding your event is taking a risk on how you're seen in the marketplace. So what is a branded event? A branded event is one that is differentiated from other events and sometimes from the event's organizer. It's a collaboration of all its stakeholders, the organizer, attendees, exhibitors, sponsors, media, contractors, and staff. As they say, it takes a village to build a brand. A branded event is innovative, using creativity to appeal rather than logic. A branded event validates the promise made in your marketing efforts and constantly cultivates new relationships within your target audience. So that will bring us to our second polling question, which is, how would you rate the strength of your event's brand? Would you consider it strong, average, weak, or no specific brand for your event? And we'll let those run for a second while you all answer that. And then, Kevin, do you want to share the results maybe from the first question?
Yes. Did people see the results from the first question? I did. Thought I shared them. I just want to make sure that people did. If not, I'll push them out again. And I will now push out the results from the second question as well, because they're very interesting, the results that we're seeing. Can everybody see the results from the second question? Hope so. All right. Once you've decided that you need to pay attention to your event's brand and that you either need to maintain it, refresh it, or start anew, you should begin by asking yourself some very key questions. The most important is, does your event support your organization's mission or vision? Not simply does having an event support your mission and vision, but does the event itself, the brand, support what you're trying to do as an organization and help define your vision going forward? For example, if your mission is to educate people within your industry, or it's to create meaningful opportunities for peer-to-peer interaction, this might suggest slightly different types of events. Does your team have a clear understanding of the event's goals and objectives? It's essential so that everything from planning the event to developing education to exhibit sales to marketing and show management maintain brand consistency. And finally, then, if the brand has been clearly articulated to all the stakeholders, then everyone involved should be supporting its goals and objectives. You know, just as Nike or Starbucks or any of these other very recognizable consumer brands, TED has become one of the most recognizable event brands. And when you think of TED, you don't really think of the logo. In fact, many people don't even know what it stands for. TED began in 1984 as a conference where technology, entertainment, and design converged. But today it covers almost all topics. TED's brand is about spreading ideas. Its mission is very simple. It's a global community welcoming people from every discipline and culture who seek a deeper understanding of the world. Now, do you feel that that brand supports the organization's mission? I'd say so. So with your own event, you also want to ask, does your event have a life of its own? This is a tough question for a lot of association events in particular that are tied to their annual meetings. You might want to consider establishing a brand for your event that is less about your annual meeting and more about delivering your larger mission and vision. You also want to ask, is your event growing and evolving? A strong brand needs to evolve over time. For instance, while TED was originally about where technology, entertainment, and design converged, today it covers almost all topics in an effort to support its mission of spreading a deeper understanding of the world. And finally, can participants of your event succinctly describe the event, and would the description be fairly consistent? So listening to those descriptions, whether it's in a post-show survey or something like that, will help you understand if your event is branded and whether it's branded properly. You brand an event in much the same way that you would brand an organization. And I'm sure many of you have been through this. It's a process, and it requires time and a great deal of collaboration. Once you've decided to brand your event, you start with research. You want to have a clear understanding of your audience, all of them, whether it's association members, attendees, exhibitors, sponsors, the media, and any others. And not only those who are now participating, but those who might participate in the future of your event, should you expand from where it is now. You need to have a clear understanding of the competitive landscape. And that's not only what other events appeal to your target audience, but what other channels are being used to provide them with the content that your event delivers, which might include websites, apps, online learning, and so on. Then you need to position your event. And simply put, positioning is how you want your event to be perceived by the outside world. Next, you need to develop a strategy for developing the event itself, not just the content, floor plan, and the logistics of the event, but the whole experience of its participants. You also need to develop a strategy for marketing and promoting the event, as well as any other aspects like exhibit and sponsor sales, speaker relations, and so on. Then, of course, you must produce the event. In doing so, you'll test and evaluate what works and what doesn't, and then make revisions. And like the TED example, you must evolve your event to adapt to the changing needs of your audience and the changing mission and vision of your organization. APCO International is a trade association that serves the public safety communications industry, basically 911 call operators, supervisors, and others who support them. Their trade show and conference was simply called APCO Annual Meeting and Expo. It wasn't growing particularly fast. Non-attendee surveys indicated that many people who didn't attend felt that it was the association's annual meeting, so as a non-member, it wasn't for them. In an effort to expand the show's reach beyond members, APCO rebranded the show to become Powerful Connections. And this spoke to the main benefits of attending, connecting with others in the industry, and at the same time, the benefit of 911 operators, which is connecting people in need with public safety. So this new branding opened the show up to new attendees, which was very important to the sponsors and the exhibitors. Another similar rebranding was done by National Mining Association. Their trade show used to be branded as the association show, but in order to grow, it became Mine Expo, a show that appealed to the broader industry. This is a fairly common issue, especially among association shows. The ISC West and ISC East security industry shows work together under the same overall brand, but they have very different audiences and positioning. So while ISC West is the larger global opportunity for the entire supply chain to come together to see what's new for the business, The value proposition for ISC East until recently wasn't as clearly defined. Just under 5 years ago, ISC East was struggling, declining in attendance and exhibit space when Reed Exhibitions rebranded the event. Ed Several, Senior Vice President of Reed, told us that they did a lot of research, both qualitative and quantitative. They conducted focus groups, identified pinch points, and conducted and thought, I knew I was going to have struggle with this one, conducted with ethnography, which I think is a great term, where they literally walked in their attendees' shoes, which is a very novel process. That in-depth research to really understand the customer needs went a long way in shaping a brand that today targets the right people with exactly what they're looking for. So ISC East is a highly targeted show to the middle of the security distribution chain. Its square footage sales, attendee satisfaction scores, and net promoter scores are all growing. And in 2015, it was named one of the 50 fastest growing shows by Trade Show Executive Magazine. And now I'm going to turn it over to Allison Moser.
Thanks for the introduction, Kevin. Kevin and Elizabeth just overviewed event branding and why it's important. Now, how can you evaluate your brand and make it work? First, I suggest you look at brand vehicles and communicators. When describing your brand, you want to focus on certain brand vehicles that help tell your story. And you want to be certain that these items resonate with your audience, not just the staff making the decisions. First, you can look at a few of these brand vehicles, namely name, position, promise, personality, tone, and story. It's important to make sure that the name accurately reflects your meeting, that the position gives your target consumers a reason to attend your conference in preference to another. Make sure your promise is unique, that your personality can relate to the attendee. Make sure your tone embodies and expresses the brand's personality and its set of values. And finally, the story. It's more than content and a narrative. And all of these put together create your story. Not long ago, we wanted to update the brand of our annual meeting, Digestive Disease Week. The first step was configuring a new brand roadmap, marketing guide, and the logo elements. And since DDW is a meeting sponsored by 4 different GI societies, we needed to figure out a way to incorporate the colors of each, but still maintain its own identity for the meeting. The brand roadmap identified these primary brand communicators that are listed on this screen. Now for the next step, once you have your brand vehicles figured out, then it's time to create a strategy to disseminate the story to your prospects. We're going to put up a quick poll to learn how many secondary communicators you're currently using.
That poll question is up now, and in about 30 seconds we'll put the results up, and I will also read out the results from the first 2 polls too in case anybody missed those. I'm posting those results now, and you'll see that the question was asked, how many brand communicator vehicles do you use for your event? 57% said 1 to 3, 21% said 4 to 6, and 21% said 10 or more.
That's an interesting mix. On this next slide, you'll see some secondary brand communicators that you actually might use for your meeting already. They include logos, brochures, newsletters, etc. You see a long list of communicators on this slide, but it's essential that you tailor your channels to those that resonate most with your audience. It's not always best to do everything, but rather segment based on what you know drives your prospects. The logos, brochures, your website, and the like support your brand, but they do not define your brand. Proper branding brings value to your meeting and for your audience. For DDW, you can see on this slide that we primarily used a branding that incorporated stock photos that ranged from year to year. And we wanted our brand recognized by attendees year to year, but also to new prospects around the world. The overall logos and website have a specific design each year, but the smaller pieces are tailored down to different audiences and includes specific messaging that would drive them to register. here you can see for our 2016 meeting, we had a little bit of a change, or rather a big change in what we used for our brand. And there are 5 good ways to measure your branding efforts, and you want to think of them in relation to how you market your event. Are they distinctive and not like every other event? Are they relevant to your event and not generic? Are they memorable, and will they stand out in a crowd? Are they extendable across a variety of marketing platforms like print, digital, social, and PR? And are they deep and meaningful? So like I said on this slide, you can see the second phase of evaluating our brand. And like Kevin mentioned earlier, it's always important to go back and make sure that you want your brand to describe your meeting accurately. So we recently reignited DDW's brand because we felt the imagery was getting redundant and it didn't translate well to on-site branding. When you got there, it didn't look like a cohesive meeting. So we decided to introduce a new color palette with these 2 main colors, but still keep some individual society colors to give it a fresh look. This branding is sharper on marketing pieces and does correlate well to our on-site pieces as well. And I'm going to slide right into another event branding case study. Our other panelist, Martha, was unable to make the call, so I am going to go through her slides for her. And like Kevin mentioned in the introduction, she is the Director of Marketing for AASLD, and they host the Liver Meeting. The annual meeting of AASLD is a mouthful. Many years ago, members and attendees started calling it the Liver Meeting. The board made this nickname the official name of the meeting and registered it as a trademark. Everything went well, and attendance at the event rose steadily. They started with 12 attendees in 1950, and by 2011 had more than 8,000. Over the years, the 2 brand identities began to diverge to the point where the meeting was no longer connected in the attendees' minds with the association. You can see in this brochure cover from 2011 on the left, compared to the AASLD membership piece on the right, that these 2 pieces don't look like they go together at all. This was a problem because as a membership association, they were losing opportunities to cross-promote other offerings with this main event. In fact, focus groups and surveys of meeting attendees found that some respondents were not aware that AASLD even sponsored the Liver Meeting. At the same time, the field of hepatology was growing. For the first time, AASLD faced competition with another association for members and meeting attendees. They used to only be the Liver Meeting. A few years ago, a competitor's smaller event started taking off and grew very quickly until it was almost the same size as AASLD's event. This competing event had the additional advantages of better locations, Europe versus the U.S., and the audience's perceptions that it was newer, younger, and cooler. Fortunately, the same market research that found their weakness also uncovered their strength. The meeting has extremely high satisfaction rates. 94% of attendees are satisfied or extremely satisfied. So they developed a strategy to tie the value of the meeting with the value of the association. The Liver Meeting is their largest program and revenue source, but they wanted to make sure that attendees know it is only one of many of AASLD's offerings. It has been a multi-step process. The first step from 2013 and 2014 was to position the event as a sub-brand of AASLD. They wanted to make the association's name part of the event logo and use a color palette that better complements the association's branding. So in both examples, for DDW and for AASLD, that you can see the color palette is very important to the overall event branding. They created a branded experience at the meeting as well that promotes AASLD's other programs, linking the positive meeting experience to the association's programs. The image on the right is a brochure for meeting registration. The photo on the left shows an attendee using a touchscreen station to view e-posters at the meeting. The meeting content is surrounded by messaging about AASLD membership and other association programs. The look and feel of the on-site stations is an extension of the marketing campaign and branding that they use to promote the meeting. The next step was a rebrand of the association. One of the key things they kept in mind during the process was that the meeting brand and the association brand needed to complement each other. The association and the event use similar elements in their visual identity now. The same orange and green color palette, the same fonts, and the same curved shapes. And you can see examples of both on the slide. One of the logos is for the liver meeting, and the secondary logo is for AASLD. In these examples, you can see how the association and the event are now more closely linked. The event logo now includes the association's name, and all event marketing uses design elements that reflect the association's new brand. After visually linking the event's brand with the association's brand, they use the event as a platform to achieve the association's goals. Here is a photo of the setup of their booth at the meeting, which they call the Pavilion. This booth is in a high-traffic area and promotes membership and their other programs. This is where attendees go to join, renew, and learn everything about what AASLD is doing throughout the year. As I mentioned earlier, 94% of attendees are satisfied or extremely satisfied with the event. They know about the event. They like the event. This is their effort to tell them about the other things that we do. What are some of the other things that AASLD does? A big one is membership. AASLD has over 8,000 attendees at the meeting each year, but less than 3,000 of them are actually members. So they have an opportunity to convert customers to members. One of the functions of the pavilion that you just saw is dedicated to this goal. And here's a close-up on this slide. They also use testimonials from members throughout the meeting venue. On the left are window clings they placed in an eating and networking area, and on the right is some of the signage that identifies the pavilion. So here again you can see how they're merging the branding of the association and the meeting together. One of the other key things that they did at the liver meeting was some PR for the association. They wanted people to remember that they are the leader in the field and that they can provide the resources they need to be successful. As Martha would say, this is still a work in progress as they just launched the new association brand in November. But I can tell you that since 2011, which was the year of the pink and yellow liver meeting brochure you saw earlier, event attendance has grown slowly but surely by 4%, while membership has grown by 38%. They had over 100 new members join at this year's meeting in November. Finally, our revenue. In 2015, AASLD had a 39% increase in revenue over the previous year. Now, most of the reasons for that are beyond the scope of the presentation, but we can confidently say that strengthening the brand allowed them to successfully charge more money for the same project. Given that they already had a successful event before they decided to rebrand it, you could ask this question: why fix it if it's not broken? The answer is that you could be missing opportunities. For AASLD, they were missing the opportunity to control their message. By letting the liver meeting brand itself, they were allowing it to stand alone rather than positioning it as what it is, one program among many other great programs. They've now taken control of their messaging, and an added bonus is that they can cross-promote all of their programs with one another. You could also miss an opportunity to shape your audience's perception of your event. They found themselves facing a competitor that was perceived as more exciting and cooler, and they were in danger of losing market share to them. Finally, revenue. As I said earlier, most of the reasons for increased revenue are beyond the scope of this presentation, but a strong brand adds value to your event and helps you maximize your revenue.
thank you, Allison, very much for stepping in and helping out Martha, who, as you said, she had an emergency that kept her from being able to join us here at the last minute. So, Allison, thank you for doing that. And Allison and Martha have worked closely in the past. Martha used to work at DDW, and the DDW show that Allison is in charge of marketing for includes the Liver Association, or the AASLD. So they work very closely together. So, Allison, thank you very much for being able to pick up that part of the presentation and run with it. We're getting a few questions that are coming in. So I encourage everybody to take a couple of minutes and think and send us questions that you might have so that we can answer them here. As you can also see from this screen, we have all of our contact information available to you as well. If you have specific questions about the liver meeting and the rebranding that Martha did there, you can certainly contact Martha directly. Her email address is posted here. I also just wanted to take a minute or two for some of you who might have joined us a little bit later on to reveal, again, what the results of our polls were, because I think they were really good questions that sort of help you all as attendees of this webinar sort of understand what your peers are doing. The first question was, do you currently engage in an intentional branding effort specifically for your event? And 75% of you do, and 25% of you don't, and that was based on about 18 people. The second question then was, how would you rate your event brand? 40% rated their own event as strong, 47% rated it as average, 7% rated it as weak, and 7% had no brand. And then the third question was, how many brand communicators vehicles do you use for your event? And the results were that 57% of you used 1 to 3 of those that Allison was discussing. 4 to 6 were used by 21% of you, and 21% of you used 10 or more. So I thought that was interesting as well. So I'm going to now go to the questions that we have, and I will read the questions out and direct them to people on our panel to answer. The first one was that one of the attendees was curious to hear about how hashtag social media and hashtag content marketing play a role. And happy to let both of our panelists answer that question. Liz, I know that you're very much involved in social media for several of these projects, so perhaps you'd like to answer the question first.
Sure. Thanks, Kevin. I think that content marketing and social media play a big role in promoting the brand of the event and also, communicating its brand promise and sort of making sure the messaging is always consistent. I think with any marketing vehicle that you're using, social media is no exception. You want to maintain a specific message and tone that you've established for your brand and adhere to it no matter what vehicle you're using. So as Allison discussed brand vehicles, I would say that content marketing and social media marketing are two of those vehicles. And I guess the other thing that I would add in thinking about content marketing and the types of content that you need to produce, those, whether it's a blog post or a white paper or a webinar that is preceding your event, as sort of a marketing effort for your ultimate face-to-face event, all of those should be measured against the brand and the brand promise to make sure that they are delivering that consistency. Allison, would you add anything else to that?
I completely agree with you. I think those are both two very big pushes, at least for DDW. On the social media side, too, I think it's important to understand your industry when using social media. I'm in the healthcare side of it, and originally when social media became really popular, it took some time for the healthcare industry, and by that I mean, doctors using social media. So, make sure that you're researching your audience and that you're using social media and content marketing in a way that makes sense for your individual audience.
And one thing, Allison, that's a good point that you make because, we've always talked about how important content marketing is, especially for events, and particularly its role in extending the life of an event from the 3 or 4 days of the event itself to extend to 365 days a year. And, of course, the best way to maintain that engagement with attendees and prospective attendees is through content marketing. But interestingly, that's a little bit of an issue for some medical shows because a lot of the information that's presented at a medical show is proprietary and can't be shared. So as you're saying, you have to know your audience. You also have to know your show, and you have to know your industry as well. But to Liz's point, too, what's interesting about all these communication vehicles is not only you need to think about using them, but you need to understand, too, that each of them are used for distinctly different purposes of getting people through the decision-making cycle. So some of them are really for creating awareness and sort of establishing that brand awareness, whereas others of them are really designed to push registration or push exhibit sales. So not only do you have to consider using many of them and you have to understand who your target audience is, but you've got to also understand where each of these lay in terms of helping get people through the decision-making process. We have another question, and that is, can you give some examples of the difference between some shows that are properly branded and those that are not properly branded? Liz, did you have any examples that you wanted to share?
Yeah. I recently wrote an article for TSNN about branding, and one of the shows that I discussed in that article is a conference by SCAMPO, which is the South Carolina Association of Nonprofit Organizations, and so it's a statewide conference, and they used to be known as the SCAMPO annual conference, and they just used a theme from year to year to kind of market their event, which is, I think, very typical of a lot of events. And in 2014, they underwent a rebranding effort to evolve that conference to a summit and change the name to the South Carolina Nonprofit Summit, so that they took SCAMPO, they essentially separated it from SCAMPO, the association, and gave the name to the state and to all of the stakeholders at the event. And since that time, they've actually grown the show by 50% and have had to move to a larger venue to accommodate more attendees this past year in 2016. So, it allowed them to open the door for subsector groups to convene their own constituents at the summit, and it also offered them the flexibility to rebrand their association in the future at a future point separately. The event is no longer tied to that or known to that. So that, I think, is an example of, a really well thought out rebranding effort of, what were the weaknesses in branding it as part of the association just annual conference, and what benefits would they see by rebranding it to a larger scale.
And I have another one too that I think is interesting, and it's a show that's called InterBev. And InterBev was a show that was started by the American Beverage Association and was a hugely successful show, a big revenue generator for the association. And the association eventually sold the show, which often happens with shows as with any other asset when they started creating a lot of value. They sold the show, and what was interesting was that the show revenue and attendance started declining fairly precipitously. And eventually the new buyer sold the show back to the association for really a fraction, maybe 20% of what they had paid for it. And the association took the show back and they built it again and eventually sold it again. So they made money on the show twice. And what they found was that when they owned the show satisfied the association's mission and vision very clearly. And so the attendees and the exhibitors were very clear about what the show was trying to accomplish and saw that it did. When it was then taken by an organization other than the association, they basically continued to put out the same kind of show, but it no longer supported what the new owner's mission and vision were, so they didn't communicate it as well, didn't support it financially as well, because it wasn't aligned with their own mission and vision. So that, I think, is just a very good example of how important it is to make sure that your event brand is consistent with what the show organizer's mission and vision are. We had one more question, sort of a comment really, and that is how do you differentiate, or how do you know when the problem with the show, if attendance is flat or exhibit sales are flat, is marketing or branding? And I think that that's a very good question, because I think sometimes the two things get confused. You know, you can have a show that is very appropriately branded, you know, that the show itself is communicated clearly, that it's consistent with the organizer's mission and vision, but it may not be marketed well. On the other hand, you might have a show that is marketed very well, but the brand itself is not well communicated, so the attendance might be lagging. So you really have to separate those two and look at the branding first, because that's what's going to drive everything else. Make sure that the branding is done correctly, and then separately look at the marketing and make sure that you've properly identified the target audiences, that you've very properly identified what the benefits and competitive advantages are, and that you come up with a communication plan that satisfies exactly what those goals and objectives are. So I think that that's a good question, and that they are two separate things and have to be dealt with separately. And those are all the questions that we have for right now. So Arlene, I can hand this back over to you at this point, and unless you have additional questions.
Nope, those were great questions, Kevin. We appreciate everybody being on board for TSNN's live webinar today. We can accept additional questions if you want to email me at ashows@tarsusus.com in case you wanted to ask a very specific question to any of our panelists or moderators. We will make sure the questions get to the proper people. But we also wanted to just say a very resounding thank you very, very much to our sponsors who make these presentations possible for free. It's Signature Boston, BCEC, and OnStream Media. Thank you very much. And the recording will be back on TSNN for anybody who would like to listen to it again or share it or view it at a different time at tsnn.com/TSNN-webinars. Stay tuned via TSNN for more webinars in the future. We have one on technology coming up in June, but we will let you know about that. And follow hashtag TSNN webinar if you wanted to hear or see any of the content that was missed or you might have missed or want to reshare out in Twitter. So thanks again for the panelists, and thanks again for Forrest Miller for joining us, and have a great day.